All right, I think we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the first of our two virtual mayoral candidate forums hosted by Make Homes Happen. We are very glad to have you with us this evening. My name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I am the Deputy Executive Director at the Minnesota Housing Partnership. We are a Make Homes Happen member. I will be the MC and the moderator for this evening. So, a few housekeeping items before we begin. We are using Zoom webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. We're recording this webinar and we will share it on the Make Homes Happen Facebook page by the end of the month. Audience members, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in questions you have for candidates. Finally, for candidates who would like to do so, I invite you at this time to share your website, contact page, or email address in the chat in case voters want to follow up with some additional questions. So we have an important election coming up November 2nd. Less than 2 months away, all 13 council members, the mayor, park board, and board of estimate and taxation seats are up for election. To see who will be on your ballot, visit the Secretary of State's website. Also, you can check out the city's website for voting, www.vote.minneapolismn.gov for how, when, and where to vote. Kevin, who's managing our tech tonight, thank you, Kevin, will share those links in the chat. Minneapolis elections use ranked choice voting. You can rank your first, second, and third choice candidates on your ballot. So when you listen to the candidates tonight, consider not just your first choice, but also your second and your third. Before we hear from candidates, let me tell you a little bit about Make Homes Happen. We are a coalition of community-based groups and organizations that advocate for affordable housing development, preservation, and tenant rights in Minneapolis. In 2017, we helped successfully push for $40 million investment in the Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund. However, the housing needs of our community far outweigh those dollars spent. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated what was already a housing crisis, and we know housing is a critical issue for our city. City leaders have significant influence on the policies, programs, and funding choices that impact our community. That's why Make Homes Happen is hosting this forum tonight. In order to ensure the fairness of our election series, Make Homes Happen used a uniform process in communicating with candidates. We approached each candidate, invited them to participate in a Zoom interview about housing, and asked 3 questions. Candidates had 2 minutes to respond to each question. We recorded candidate answers and will play them back for you now as opening statements. We did not edit the content of those responses, but we did cut each answer off at 2 minutes. Anything that was said after 2 minutes will not be shared here today. This was done to ensure standardization across the interviews we conducted. Finally, candidates who did not participate in the Zoom interview will have 2 minutes to present an opening statement live today. So let's get ready to hear from candidates. Kevin will play the recorded Zoom interviews. We will start in alphabetical order by last name. So we start with Nate Atkins.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
I would say I don't believe it is. I believe that we're making progress in some areas, but not enough in others. I do believe that there has been far too much deference given to larger developers, really at the cost of local and smaller property owners, which I think has had kind of a deleterious effect on the abilities of our neighborhoods to maintain, I guess you could say, their neighborhood identity. Other things I think we've failed to do are kind of lift the various burdens on property owners in this city so that we can be more creative and more innovative with how we address affordable housing needs. One thing that I've seen people discuss is for people who own larger amounts of property or larger lots within the city, there should be zoning allowances or regulations that are lifted that would allow them to build what are known as tiny homes on their property to serve the needs of maybe family members that need affordable housing, friends, or just people in the community. Ideas like that I think are very innovative and creative and need to be explored and given to people.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
As I mentioned in my previous answer, I think that issues regarding zoning laws in relation to what homes can be built, what size homes, and certain, I guess you could say, occupancy limits that are currently being placed on property owners need to be reinvestigated and considered. Anytime that we really kind of restrict housing to certain types of housing or a certain supply of housing, when you limit that supply, you do see increased prices for housing. Another thing that we need to be focusing on is that I think is being kind of overlooked is the importance of creating generational wealth within housing. I think that a lot of times we get kind of lost when we talk about affordable housing and the need for it to not just be rental housing, but also home ownership for people. Home ownership, particularly in the neighborhood that I live in, which is the Kenny neighborhood down in Southwest Minneapolis. We have a lot of homeowners who have lived here for 40, 50, even 60 years. And those sorts of homeowners, living in the neighborhood provide stability, they provide cohesion, and most of all, they provide the generational wealth for their families that's needed. So I think that we need to kind of refocus some of our talks about affordable housing and really kind of focus on the idea of building generational wealth within our housing policies. I also mentioned previously the idea of allowing property owners, typically homeowners, to build and add on to their lots to meet the needs of people in the community, be it family members, friends, or just people that they'd like to open up their additional property to.
What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as mayor that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
So I've worked on and off for approximately 20 years in various aspects of residential construction. I've worked for both building supply companies, home remodelers, and new home builders. I did take some time off during the housing bust and the financial crisis back in 2007, 2008, whereas I worked in a different industry, but I've worked primarily in residential construction. And I have seen kind of what works and what doesn't work when it comes to creating not just housing, but affordable housing for people. Something to kind of think about, something that I've experienced. The home builder that I work for primarily builds up in the Northwest Metro. And we currently build houses that, if they were built in the city of Minneapolis, would cost $700,000 to $800,000. But when we build in places like Coon Rapids, Ramsey, or Otsego, the price of the housing drops to about $350,000 to $400,000. I think that's reflective of something that's going on in the city in terms of our policies, regulations, and laws that unnecessarily drive up the cost of housing for people here. And we need to really consider lifting a lot of those regulations and those laws so that the market can be more competitive, it can drive down pricing, and that we can retain homeowners within this city. So again, like I said, I've had close to 20 years of experience working in residential construction, and I believe that's a very valuable tool in bringing it to the table as mayor.
Thank you. We will now hear the recorded statements of A.J. Awad.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Yep. So thank you for the question. Generally, I believe the city is headed in the right direction. And the reason why is because the general citizenry is really starting to wake up on how they need to get involved. And as many of you probably know, we're starting to really adopt policies that are very, very radical in the sense that it's never been tried here in the city. Such things like rent control and or rent stabilization, things such like tenant opportunity to purchase. So overall, I do believe the city is in the right direction, but there's always creep-in involved when the establishment wants to get their hands in the process. And we just got to be very cognizant of that at all times and making sure that, you know, the people on the ground, advocacy groups, neighbors, the average resident and citizen of Minneapolis is not just outsourcing really the accountability for the city and city leaders to really do right by working class and low-income individuals.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
So, and as a mayoral candidate, I mean, the job description is a little different than council members who are legislative bodies. But overall, one of the things that I think is very much missing in the leadership of the mayor's office and overall the city council is anti-displacement measures. Development is happening rapidly throughout the city. And there is pushback to really put in anti-displacement measures. And that's probably the biggest critique that I would probably make in the trajectory of the city at the moment. And when it comes to budgeting and when it comes to working with developers and working on investments and building more, we need to really have that framework and outlook. It's not just about affordable housing overall. It's also about anti-gentrification. Many people have lived in their homes or in their neighborhoods for generations, and the rapid growth of the city is going to have negative impacts. And the thing that I really want to keep firm and center is how do we keep the diversity in the city, not only just build more affordable housing. And one good thing to really think about in this sense is we need to think broadly about funding. I mean, affordable housing has to do with funding. And if we're not going to be thinking about creative ways to do that, we're not really going to change much of the landscape here in the city when it comes to keeping public housing public and building more affordable housing units. One way that I propose we do that is really do the democratic thing, the progressive thing, and really tax people that can afford to, namely people that are moving into these luxury development properties and apartments throughout the city.
What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as mayor that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I'm a war refugee and immigrant to this country. And when we first landed to the United States, it's very hard for our family of 12 to survive in the marketplace. And we relied heavily on public housing. And my lived experience, I think, really comes from that in understanding the need and the importance of initiatives like this and making sure that people have ways out. I am fortunate enough to now have climbed the economic ladder where I'm not in public housing anymore. But my heart is always in its roots. And what really I struggle with is seeing leadership and seeing political leaders not really having the certain compassion and understanding that people are being hurt and people are being challenged. And if we're going to do more, I think my lived experience will give me credibility to really actually hopefully be a great advocate for individuals. But more importantly, my mediation skills will give me the trait to be able to negotiate in good faith. As I said, the number one issue for me in building more affordable housing units and expanding public housing is to think about how we're going to get more funding, and we're going to expand the budget in the city of Minneapolis. And I think that the skills that I have as an alternative dispute resolution specialist, being able to understand that it's not about positions and it's about interests, and really facilitating compromise between parties day in and day out is going to really be useful as mayor, as I try to negotiate and get big developers and people that are more well off to really buy into this concept that taxes is a good idea, and it's going to alleviate this homelessness that we have in the city, and it's going to make a big impact in the way we deliver housing. And I hope those skills come to use for me if I become mayor and I'm fortunate enough to get your support.
Thank you. We will now hear the recorded statements of Clint Conner.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
First, my name is Clint Conner, and I'm running for mayor of Minneapolis. Thank you very much for having me and allowing me to join this forum. The issue of housing is one of the three main prongs of my platform. I've spent hundreds of hours over the last several years as an attorney representing low-income tenants and owners on a pro bono basis on housing matters, including affordable housing, eviction defense, dealing with issues of discrimination in housing, and working with leaders of our housing legal aid societies. I was named Volunteer Lawyer Network Volunteer of the Year in 2019, and I've received commendations from the Minnesota Supreme Court and the city of Minneapolis for my work on housing issues. Our current mayor says we're heading in the right direction, but he glosses over some very important issues relating to housing, and frankly, we are not heading in the right direction nearly as aggressively as we should be. We do not have enough truly affordable housing. Many of the units deemed affordable are not serving the people who really need it. Way too many people are paying too much of their income in rent. This burden is borne disproportionately by our BIPOC community. 80% of the Black community in Minneapolis are renters, and many are paying way too much of their income to rent. And we've got to solve that issue right away. And as the 80% renter number indicates, we need to focus on creative solutions to immediately lift homeownership among people of color in Minneapolis. We also need to put our foot down as a city with respect to developers and rethink how we deal with them. We cannot agree to let them build based on promises of affordable units on certain terms and then allow them to back out of those promises due to cost overruns. We need a serious look at rent control. I'm particularly interested in exploring stratified rent control that applies to large developers and landlords, but allowing some flexibility for smaller landlords and programs that help renters stay in their homes when rent rises. I agree with allowing voters to directly.
Time. Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Yes, absolutely. Our leadership is overlooking the issue of livability, low-income tenants lacking legal representation in the eviction process, the need for quick action financing for housing support, and the unforgivable low percentage of our people of color that own homes. One of the three main prongs of my platform is stable, affordable, and livable housing for all of Minneapolis, and none of the leadership is talking about livability. Over the years, I've spent hundreds of hours representing low-income tenants and homeowners, and I've seen firsthand the unhealthy conditions that so many Minneapolitans are dealing with. We're talking about families and children getting seriously ill with asthma and other illnesses due to mold and other infestations. In fact, I went on a ride along with the Minneapolis 1st Precinct last Friday, and I took a bunch of pictures of infestations in the halls of the units of the people we went to help. We need to beef up our housing inspection program, make it much more proactive in addressing and forcing landlords to correct unhealthy living conditions. We're not doing nearly enough to make sure low-income tenants have legal representation during the eviction process either. Many low-income tenants are bullied through the eviction process by lawyers representing landlords, and are stuck in a never-ending struggle against finding housing where they are accepted and with evictions. And I'm going to push for a creation of a low-income housing public defender office that supplements and works in coordination with our existing housing-focused legal aid organizations. Under current leadership, they're overlooking the ways to more quickly and flexibly address low-income housing crises. I want to work with leadership in Hennepin County and other areas to consider establishing a voucher program that will supplement Section 8, will provide quicker, more flexible, affordable housing options. Our leadership's also overlooking the lack of homeownership among the BIPOC community. We need to address that right away. And we're sitting on a large amount of unallocated federal emergency funding. I think we should consider using a large chunk of that to do something groundbreaking in terms of providing stability and housing for our BIPOC community.
What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as mayor that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
Well, until I moved to Minneapolis when I was 39, I had never owned a home. I'd lived in a lot of places, and as a single adult, a married adult, and as a father to a growing family, I rented, and I rented a lot of places. I'd always been a renter. Before putting roots down here, I'd rented in Michigan, Chicago, North Carolina, New York City, Silicon Valley, California, and then Tokyo, Japan. And affordability has always been an issue for me, and frankly, I've been privileged. So I can only imagine what so many people deal with on a daily basis. And in fact, I've seen it firsthand. Now living in Minneapolis, I've dedicated hundreds of hours while a lawyer and representing low-income tenants and homeowners on housing matters, including affordability issues, eviction defense, and discrimination issues. And I will say that the issue of affordable housing is incredibly alarming, and we're not hearing enough stories of the people who are going through these problems. And the numbers are startling, and I will welcome the chance to provide more numbers that will wake the community up. But our current leadership seems to be glossing over some of this. We talk about affordability numbers, and there's nice words on paper, but frankly, we don't know the stories. The stories are not being told, and the stories are alarming. And I would like to work hand in hand with leaders of our housing legal aid societies here in Minneapolis, which I've done over the last several years, and developed great relationships and knowledge about what's going on in our broader Minneapolis community. And I want to work with them to bring the stories to light so that we push the people who control the levers of power in the right direction, in making sure that our communities as a whole are given stable, affordable, and livable housing across the city.
Thank you. We will now hear the recorded statements of Mark Globus.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
I take housing very seriously. I believe I'm the one person in the race that has real world experience on two fronts. First, I believe I'm the only person in the race that has owned a small apartment building. And secondly, I believe I'm the only person in the race who has actually developed and built housing as part of my career. Third, I'm a renter and I continue to be a renter. I've never owned a home, so I know the feeling of living in a building or house that someone else owns, a building that is not your own. As with every complex issue, there are a lot of people sitting at the proverbial decision table when it comes to housing. There are renters like myself who are an extremely important part of the equation, and then there are people who own the buildings or the houses. We need a fair system that works for all and that delivers for all of us here in the city of Minneapolis. In addition, I have a big heart and I am very sensitive. Housing for all is so important. There is nothing that drives a stake into my heart and makes me feel worse than when I drive by a homeless encampment. And there's actually one just 3 blocks from my place. I live near the sculpture garden and near Loring Park. And just getting a little bit into the discussion, there are 2 main questions that come with any discussion of housing. and we must cover those first. Question number one is, do we have enough apartments or houses available for rent in the city of Minneapolis that are considered affordable? So that's question number one. We need to consider that stand separate. Question number two that we have to ask is, can our brothers and sisters pass the background check to be able to qualify for the criteria it takes to live in these?
Time. Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
There's two main questions, issues that revolve around any discussion on housing. Question number one is, do we have enough apartments or houses available for rent in the city of Minneapolis that are considered affordable? Question two, can people pass the background check to be able to qualify for the criteria it takes to live in these apartments or houses? Let's take a look at both of these because these are so important to understanding and quantifying the housing issue. So it's a two-part question. When you talk to people who own small apartments or houses for rent, and I've spoken with many small owners, they repeat to me the same two questions. And I ask them, do we have enough available and vacant apartments and homes for rent? And this is what they tell me. They say that they believe there is enough apartments or to rent out there, which is a surprising thing to most people. And it surprised me a little bit until I started taking a much closer look at the problem. Sometimes there's not enough apartments that are larger size for families, 3 or 4 bedrooms. But if you're looking at apartments for 1 or 2 bedrooms, there are significant numbers of units in the city. In fact, I just talked to an apartment owner who has a number of buildings in South Minneapolis just a week ago. He told me that he has 150 apartments that he wants to get leased out and he needs to get leased out. So let's move quickly into number 2, which is the problem, and that's qualifying to pass that background check. That is a problem. And how do we do that? What are the problems with the background check? There's things such as bankruptcy, credit, eviction, or people who unfortunately have a felony on their record. So the challenge revolves around number 2, and it's not
Time.
What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as mayor that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
I'm a problem solver. So let's solve for that question number 2, being able to qualify for the lease. That's where the issue lies. So let's take a look at a first solution. What I really like to do is have the city guarantee the rent for people who have a challenge with their credit history. The city is doing this a little bit now with the pilot program, but they need to do it a lot more. When a renter finds an apartment they like, but the owner says you have a few credit issues, I'd like the city to step up and make an investment in the renter. The city's going to guarantee that renter's rental payment stream. That way the owner, in many circumstances, is going to get comfortable having that resident in their building or in their house. This could be a major program for the city of Minneapolis. Program 2, I'd like for the city to potentially cut property taxes on apartment buildings or rental housing. If we cut that property tax, that in return for owners making their apartments or houses more affordable for people of limited means or people who need to reach a certain threshold. Because if we reduce the property tax burden, that means the owner needs to bring in less revenues to break even. So they can pass that on to the renter. That's a good solution. And the third challenge that we have is people that may have some sort of felony on the record. And actually, I have some big, bold ideas for public-private housing partnership. And I love this program, the 38th Street Thrive project, which is in Ward 8, Councilmember Andrea Jenkins' ward. And I want to work closely with Andrea to help her get the funding she needs to do this program.
Thank you. We'll now hear the recorded statements of Kate Knuth.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Well, thank you for the question about housing affordability. I think making sure every person in our city has a safe, affordable, secure place to live is a basic function of our city government, because housing is both a human right and the foundation of public safety and security. I think we have made some progress as a city, but and I think you'd hear the mayor talk about record investments in affordable housing and some programs like Stable Homes, Stable Schools, which I think is a really great program. But when I look at the outcomes we're looking to achieve, we aren't where we need to go. We still have to ramp up significant work in housing. And when I think about those outcomes, we need to make sure that our city does not have unhoused neighbors and homeless people, that we are moving people into safe, stable, supported housing situations. Right now, we are a city of renters, and half of the people in Minneapolis rent, and about half of renters are cost burden, which means they're paying more than 30% of their income per month in housing costs. And that's not a great way to be moving forward on safe, stable housing for everyone. I also think we need to be really focused on pathways into homeownership, both as a safe, stable, secure housing strategy and as a multi-generational wealth building strategy. We are still have the largest homeownership gap in the country in between Black families and white families. That's unacceptable, and it's something we really need to work on as a city. So while there's been some great policy work and programs started and great work on eviction support or preventing eviction supports and helps in the council, there's a lot more we need to do to make sure that every person in our city has a safe, secure place to call home.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Well, thanks for the question about what we need to be doing in addition to what is happening now to make progress on making sure every person in our city has a safe, affordable place to live. And I'm really grateful for the work of many advocates and community organizers and this council to push forward on tenant opportunity to purchase, to push forward on rent stabilization, and to push forward on a host of renter protections and eviction prevention protections. I think those are super important. And as mayor, I would continue to push on and lead on those. Two specific things that I thought about that I would like to see more in the conversation around housing in the city. First is investing more fully in public housing. I do support a full public housing levy to make sure we are maintaining the public housing we have and investing in more public housing going forward. When I hear folks talking about affordable housing, we want to make sure it is truly affordable. And the thing about public housing is it connects a person's income with their housing costs in ways that make it truly affordable. Another thing I think is really important to talk about in our housing conversation is the cost of operating housing and the cost of utilities, the cost of energy. As we see climate change impacts ramping up, it's been so hot this summer already, and we'll expect to see that even happening more. We need to make sure that people are not cost burdened just by rent, but are also not cost burdened by energy and utilities. And so we have the city's 4D program for rental housing, which is some progress, but I think we need to make more full investments in conservation and efficiency and safety of people's homes, which make them more comfortable and more affordable to live in over time. So the public housing and the ramping up energy conservation and efficiency targeted specifically at under-resourced families and homes, I think is two additional places I'd love to see more policy work at the city.
What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as mayor that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
I bring both a commitment to really taking on the housing crisis and using the multiple different strategies to get more housing, more affordable and public housing, to increase density, and to make sure we are protecting the half of the people in the city who are renters, to make sure they have protections and eviction preventions. That said, I also bring experience working across levels of government and with large public organizations and in public-private partnerships to make sure that we are all coming together to push what we need at the scale needed to really address the housing crisis. Housing is not just something the city does on its own. There's work with the county when it comes to homelessness. There's work with the state and the federal government when it comes to significant investments in more affordable housing. We're having significant money coming in from the federal level and from the state level. And as mayor, I will be an effective advocate, having worked as a state legislator, having worked for city government, having worked for big public university at the University of Minnesota, at working across and with levels of government to make sure we are using all of the resources as effectively as possible to make sure every person in our city has a safe, decent, affordable place to call home. You know, as I wrap up, the other thing I want to say is I'm someone who really believes that housing should be approached from the idea that it is about providing safe, stable, affordable places for people to live, and not about making lots of money for people, and not as an investment to just increase capital. And as mayor, I will take that approach to make sure we are approaching our housing investments and our housing policies in ways that center housing as the foundation of a high quality of life and of basic security and safety in our city. And I look forward to digging in with the people in Minneapolis to make progress.
Whoops. Thank you. We will now hear the recorded statements of Sheila Nezhad.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Thank you for that question. I believe that the city has not gone far enough in affordable housing policies. Community groups have been organizing for truly affordable housing and housing as a human right for years. I actually first met organizers from Make Homes Happen in 2019 when I was at City Hall organizing with Reclaim the Block. And our two coalitions supported one another because we realized that we could not get to affordable housing without safety, and we could not get to safety without affordable housing. That's why I believe that the city needs to go further to pass rent control to maintain existing affordable housing, and pass the strong rent control policies where renters have a say in what the rent stabilization policy is. We also need the city to support tenant opportunity to purchase and to partner with land trusts to be able to help renters to buy their homes when their homes are available for sale. I have also worked in restaurants for 10 years, and many of my friends still do, and are hard hit during the pandemic, falling behind on rent in a way that at the current minimum wage, they could never catch up. That's why we also need rent forgiveness and eviction protection, including more funding to legal aid for eviction representation on an ongoing basis, and a general increase in tenant protections through the Tenant Navigators program, Homeline, and contracts with community groups that educate renters about their rights. I think that expanding these functions of the city is the first step towards creating truly affordable housing. Thank you.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
So I believe that we must develop a new approach to housing across the city that sets people up to succeed and stay in safe and dignified housing, and protects residents and businesses from the harms of gentrification that we're seeing under current city leadership. I, as mayor, would push for an expansion of public housing. It's time for us to stop relying on markets as a source of housing and to expand public housing, expanding it through the levy and working with land trusts. I would also like to see an expansion of housing cooperatives and making it easier for people in the city to establish housing cooperatives. Finally, I would also like to see the city invest in a housing first model when addressing unsheltered homelessness, where chronically unsheltered residents will be placed in culturally competent, stable housing. And that leads me to the real big missing piece that I've seen through my lived experience in Minneapolis, through my experience doing mutual aid work as an organizer, which is the lack of harm reduction used by the city. So harm reduction services meet people where they're at and help people get set up to succeed, to get into transitional and permanent housing. We need a moratorium on forced evictions of encampments. I've watched far too many times as our city's primary response to unsheltered homelessness has been to bulldoze people's shelters without viable alternative places for people to go. Our city can provide housing for all of our residents if we have leaders with the political will and vision. And as mayor, I would push for more public housing, more harm reduction, and a housing first model to make sure that we're making sure.
Time.
What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as mayor that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
So I am a renter. I'm a lifelong renter in Minneapolis. I have lived in areas all across the city, from north to south to west to east. I have lived all around the city. And as a renter, I bring a lived experience that will inform my leadership, right? I know what it's like to have to move because the rent is too high. I know what it's like to have bad landlords or to have to stay in a bad living situation because it's impossible to find an alternative. As someone with a dog, I know what it's like to try to search for housing, and we have landlords who don't live here trying to charge $500 non-refundable pet deposits. It's time to stop putting renters last and to put renter protections first. I work as a community organizer with Reclaim the Block, where I do broad-based safety organizing with a focus on the city budget. That means that I've partnered with organizations like IX to develop renter first budget proposals and policy proposals to bring to the council. And as mayor, I will expand on those community connections to be able to develop housing solutions with organizers, renters, BIPOC folks, LGBTQ folks, and working class people who are dedicated to housing as a human right, not as a source of profit. And the way that we're going to build good solutions to our housing crisis in Minneapolis, which anyone in Minneapolis, regardless of their lived experience, knows that we have a housing problem. And we're going to build better solutions by doing it together. And as mayor, I will bring the lived experience and connection to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear the recorded statements of Jerrell Perry.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
There are things that the city is currently working on, specifically rent stabilization. to where they're trying to make sure that landlords cannot just increase rent amounts out of nowhere to meet whatever they're trying to do and be able to put residents out on the street with nowhere else to go. So I do believe that the rent stabilization needs to be put in, but there's a lot of legalese around that right now. But the council did try to get it through. Unfortunately, the Charter Commission has given a substitute versus helping modify what was originally there. So we have work to do there. But as far as affordable housing, we have people literally sleeping on the streets right now in Minneapolis. My daughters and I were walking down Lake Street, and there's people literally laying on the sidewalks that have nowhere else to go. And our current mayor, Mr. Fry, has cited affordable housing projects going up everywhere as a solution to this. But the bad thing about that is affordable housing, a lot of these units start over $1,000, $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 a month. And that's not affordable to somebody that's currently sleeping on the sidewalk. And one of the buildings where a man was laying out in front of, there happened to be a big red banner behind him that said affordable housing. So that's even more evidence to show you that this is not affordable. Who's it affordable to? Not the people that need it the most. So we have to go to an affordable housing policy that is income-based, that is no more than 30% of income, so that it's individualized. So what's affordable for me might not be affordable for you. But if we individualize it, there will be no way to just leave people outside, because again, it will be based on their income.
Time. Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Yes, and again, I will go back to the affordable housing. The city of Minneapolis, we give away millions of dollars in subsidies to build affordable housing projects, and the developers are allowed to say how many units are going to be affordable housing, but the subsidies are going towards the entire project. So if we're going to do affordable housing projects, we need to make sure that it's all affordable housing. And again, by affordable housing, I mean individualized as affordable, meaning 30% of your income. And again, what's affordable for me may not be affordable for you. So we have to have an individualized approach to that. And as far as, we just have to put things in place, renter protections, period, so that we don't have situations like now where rent is going up. People already have a limited amount of income. Some people don't have any income. So we have to have affordable housing that has wraparound services that helps people get better jobs, get good paying jobs where they can actually provide for themselves and their families. And again, housing is a human right, should be considered as a human right in the city of Minneapolis. So we have a lot of work to do. And home ownership. So even when we're talking about affordable housing, we can't simply talk about renting. We also have to have an affordable home ownership program to where people can be generating intergenerational wealth and can pass that down to their kids. You cannot pass anything down to your children that you're renting, just like you cannot pass a job down. But home ownership, business ownership, those kind of things, it leaves a legacy. And that's where we need to take the people in Minneapolis.
What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as mayor that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
I have said many times that this election is the most important election in our city's over 170-year history. It's not your education or qualifications that's going to get our city where it needs to go. It's exactly what this question is. Practical skills, lived experiences. I myself have been homeless. My family, we've been homeless. Fortunately for us, we're still working, so we were able to have money to get a hotel room for a period of that time. But just being homeless, not having a stable place to lay your head at night, that is a feeling that I never want to feel again. So I can empathize with that feeling. And again, I would want to keep my children out of that as much as possible. So I would do everything in my power to make sure that we get programs and policies in place to where people do not have to be laying on the streets. This is a public health situation. It's a public safety situation. And it's a human situation. We don't want anybody laying out on the streets, period. We wouldn't want our children out there, so we shouldn't want anyone else's children out there, whether they're children, our brothers or sisters. We have to put policies in place to where everyone can be protected. And that includes people that are currently in housing. We have to make sure that they're able to stay in their housing. And we can do that by coming together, bringing people together, listening to the residents, the people of Minneapolis, and not listening to a single voice from the developers who have one thing in mind, and that's profit. We have people in mind, and we are going to protect the people of Minneapolis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will now hear from Troy Benjegerdes. Troy did not participate in the recorded Zoom interview, so he has 2 minutes to introduce himself to you. As per our rules for candidates, I will mute Troy if he goes past 2 minutes. Troy, please unmute yourself and go ahead with your statement.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate putting on this effort focused on housing. I want to, I guess, Elizabeth, are we starting with the question, or is this just an introduction?
This is your opportunity to introduce yourself.
So, I grew up on a farm, and one of the things I saw on this farm growing up was the world's best farmland was getting turned into subdivisions. And I hope I'm sorry if this is not working, I'm having problems with my internet. We've been taking land and we've been building subdivisions, and we've been expanding and expanding and expanding. We can't keep expanding forever. It's not a sustainable thing. And one of the things that has always interested me for at least 20 or 30 years now is how do we have a new way of looking at housing and urban development? And I also want to say that housing should be a human right. And the way we do this is we do this in cities. We do this with developing not just affordable housing. We need to develop cooperative housing. We need to develop housing that people can be owners of. And I don't know what all the answers are. There is a lot of discussion, but we need to think much bigger, and we need to think much farther. We need to think about how can everyone who lives in the city have a house? How can they have a basic income to pay for that house? And what are new ways that we can build this housing and build more density and do it in a sustainable way? That's my general introduction so far.
Thank you so much, Troy. Appreciate it. So now, and thank you to all the candidates for being here tonight and introducing yourselves to us. For the remainder of our time, we are going to hear directly from candidates in response to audience questions. We have been receiving answers through the Q&A, and I invite you to continue to submit questions. And to be fair, we will rotate which candidate answers questions first. Candidates, you will each have 2 minutes to respond to the question. When your 2 minutes is up, we will mute you and move to the next. So for this question, I will start with AJ. So if you can get ready. So the question for each candidate is, we had actually multiple questions that related to home ownership. One question was, what will you do for the Black community that has been shut out of home ownership? And we had a related question, how will you increase home ownership for BIPOC folks? AJ, 2 minutes are yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that's a very great question, and one that's actually fundamental to the overall growth of our city if we wanted to maintain its trajectory. Um, Ultimately, this is going to set on two issues. One is, changing the culture, and in fact, making sure that the younger generations in BIPOC communities have all the opportunities and resources to educate themselves about the market, understand housing and how housing wealth is created, and secondary to that, as far as direct intervention in making sure BIPOC communities have the opportunities, and I would say the investments to be, able to get these things, especially own homes, is to make sure that we're taking the red tape away, right? And that's usually the biggest block is access to capital and entry point. And for me, the city of Minneapolis should, just like all cities, be championing and trying to be, I would say, co-signing and providing through grant writing, through different cooperatives, and I would say direct investments, being able to intervene and making sure communities of color have access to capital needed. But for me, these are two-pronged approaches. I think we need to be doing both of them at the same time. And I think in the long term, the thing that's going to get us the most return on investments for commitment to communities of color to be able to actually have this is making sure that the youth are actually given the proper education and tools at an early age to be able to actually understand the markets properly, so they can actually make, I would say, take the destiny and the future into their own hands.
Thank you. Our next, kind of continuing in the order in which your introductions happened, is Clint. Clint, are you ready?
Yes, thank you for the question, and this is a great question. So I have been spending a lot of time talking with people around town after launching my campaign, and a lot of the people I talked to in North Minneapolis are curious as to how so many homes are being purchased by unknown entities. This is city plus outsiders. There are a lot of big corporations that are moving in to buy up homes across the city. BlackRock is an organization that's been highlighted recently in the media. And we have to have the city step in and actually purchase those homes for residents of North Minneapolis, and then make those homes affordable for the people who live there, and guarantee that those payments will be made for the people of Minneapolis and North Minneapolis. I mean, these people are hardworking people that need a break. I mean, we have had a history right now in the city of, redlining, and then, what I've seen firsthand is people cannot get ahead because they're paying way too much money on rent. And so we need to step in and use the funds we have from our federal emergency relief funds, and we're over at $100 million that's unallocated. I think we should use that for propping up people in the BIPOC community, particularly North Minneapolis, around the Lake Street corridor, so that they can own. We're at 80% of our Black population are renters. 45% of the white population are renters. That's wrong. And we need to start immediately to change that. Because as mentioned by other candidates and myself, homeownership means commitment to the city. We need people committed to the city. We need to start making generational wealth, and we can do that through homeownership. So we've got funds. We can also draw from all levels of government, Hennepin County, state level, and federal level to make this happen, because the world's eyes are upon us, and now is the time to capitalize. We also have a situation, as mentioned, where those who do rent are in.
Thank you, Clint. Your time was up. Next, Mark, are you ready? You might need to unmute yourself.
Yep. Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me on the program tonight. Good question. How do we increase ownership for people in the BIPOC community? In contrast to really all the candidates and the mayor, I'm actually in the business of developing and building housing. And I think there's just a little bit of a disconnect tonight between what everybody's talking about and what's really possible. Again, there's a lot of people at the table. There's the renters who are extremely important, and there's the owners who are important as well. And it's working something out that has the market working to create incentives to create the housing. That's what works. We can't just create housing out of thin air. However, one thing I've been looking at, actually this weekend, I was in North Minneapolis at a block party, and we're talking about how do we create more housing for the BIPOC community? One idea is to create a condominium building project. And what I'd like to do is combine government and private money and then backstop a certain amount of people on the mortgage. Guarantee that mortgage, which will allow people actually to buy into a building, let them pay their rent over time, get that mortgage paid back, and in the end, you'll see that increase in value, which will help create the generational wealth that everybody's trying to achieve here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Kate Knuth. Are you ready?
Yeah, when we are talking about increasing homeownership rates in the Black community, I think it's really important to talk about why that matters. And I think it matters for two really key reasons. One is stabilities in families and making sure people have control over their housing and the safety and security and stability that housing brings. The second really important part of it is wealth building, particularly generational wealth building, because of systemically racist practices over time. We have really unacceptable gaps in homeownership and in wealth between the Black community and the white community in our city. And some specific steps, I think we need to be looking at counseling and working with people closely to make sure they understand what it means to get into buying a house and what it means to buy a home. We need to be working to increase access to capital, including using some of our public money to increase access to capital for potential Black homeowners. We need to be looking at different kinds of housing options. I don't think we only assume home ownership for single family homes, but the wealth building opportunities that comes with owning a duplex or a triplex is another great option for increasing both the stability and the wealth building opportunities of home ownership in the BIPOC community. And finally, we need to be just building more housing and more housing that people are able to buy. Right now, a home is becoming out of reach for way too many people. Buying a home, whether it's a condo or a single family home or a multi-unit home, it's getting out of reach for way too many people. So we need to reduce disparities in home ownership, also be building more housing.
Thank you. Next, we have Sheila.
Thank you, and thank you to the person who asked the question. My name, again, is Sheila Nezhad. I use she, her pronouns. And I was so sad that video we recorded was before the council shut down the people's choice of rent control. So sadly, only the council can determine rent control policy that comes next. But anyway, homeownership. So I think that we absolutely need to open more pathways to Black homeownership, BIPOC homeownership. And those of us who were running for mayor since the winter, we got to be a part of Urban Homeworks had a mayoral forum in the spring. And they do really cool work in that they help folks get into rental housing in duplexes, do organizer training, housing justice organizer training, and then help folks to then be able to buy their own homes, right? And so it's support along the way, because we know that it's hard to just go from being a renter to buying a house right away. So we really need support along the way. And in the bigger picture, we need greater access to capital to be able to buy a home, right? And in order to do that, we need to look at what we're spending our money on in the city. Right now, we spend a third of our city's budget on policing. That's what I do in my work. I work on the police budget and looking at how we can invest in the things that keep us safe, like housing. So as mayor, I would fight for us to invest more in housing and housing stability, including Black home ownership, in order to build a city where we all can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. And Troy, you have the last opportunity here, 2 minutes for you.
Let's see. How do we, I think the way we increase ownership for the BIPOC community is with education, capital, and a basic income program. First, we need to increase the supply of housing, which is build more housing, build more units, make more units available. And that's going to require a lot of changes to our policy. The next but more important than that, we need to increase the supply of tenants who can pay for housing. And the way I would propose we do that is develop a comprehensive basic income program to ensure that every resident automatically has the income to pay their mortgage, not just pay their rent, pay their mortgage. We need to have more intentional communities. We need to have something like Mark's condo plan for mixed-use buildings. I also think we should take the power that the city has to issue bonds to underwrite a new class of mortgage for mixed-use, high-density buildings with a focus on livability, income diversity, and consensus decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. So we will move on to a second question. And for this question, we'll start with Clint as the first to answer. There are many questions that have been...
I didn't get an opportunity to...
Oh, I am so sorry, Jerrell. I'm looking at my list and I apparently had it out of order. Jerrell, please go ahead.
No problem. Well, first, I want to start off by thanking everybody for being here, all the audience participants. Thank you, Ms. Elizabeth, for moderating. Thank you for the other candidates for being here. Being transparent about your vision for the future. That way the residents can hold us accountable. When we're talking about home ownership among the Black community, education is paramount. AJ just talked about that education, whether it's financial fitness or historical education, talking about the redlining that it was so present here in the city of Minneapolis, the racial covenants that started here in the city of Minneapolis and spread across the nation, where neighborhoods were saying, you can't move here, start over there. And when Black residents began to do that and began to prosper, those neighborhoods were intentionally torn apart, starting with Interstate 94. That was even backed by the federal government. And then once Black residents picked up and relocated and started to prosper again, here comes Interstate 35. It tore apart the Black neighborhoods, especially in North Minneapolis. It's like, you can't have ours, go get your own. And then when you get yours, you can't have that either. So these neighborhoods were intentionally torn apart. We have to be intentional about putting them back together. Areas north, south across the city currently have vacant lots, vacant houses, abandoned businesses. We need to give opportunities for residents to secure all of that property so that we can begin to build our city back even better than it always has. We're currently working on a partnership with a young Black entrepreneur that is in the city. He currently owns over 20 homes in the city of Minneapolis, and he's tried to reach out to Mayor Frey to create this partnership to assist the Black community in procuring homes in the city of Minneapolis. And that was an opportunity that Mayor Frey refused to take. So that's something that I would be more than happy to do, because again, we intentionally tore these communities apart. We have to be intentional about putting them back together. We used to say we did not have the money for this. Racism has been declared a public health emergency in the city of Minneapolis, and the ARP, $135 million last May and $135 this coming May. The money is there, God.
I think that was someone other than myself. Kevin, was that you? So, and I want to apologize, Nate also has not had an opportunity to answer. Again, I got my list in order here. Nate, 2 minutes.
Sure. Could you, I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question?
Absolutely. So the question is, there are multiple related questions about increasing home ownership. One was stated, what will you do for Black community members that have been shut out of home ownership? A related question was, how will you increase home ownership for BIPOC folks? 2 minutes.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is, you know, when we're talking about affordable housing, we want to talk about building generational wealth. Something that I would propose is suspending property tax payments for first-time home buyers within the city for the first 5 years of owning the home, as a way for them to kind of build a little bit of capital savings, things like that within their owning a home. Things like that, we need some sort of incentives to get them to stay here. You know, I work for a local home builder, and we're building homes in places like Ramsey, Coon Rapids, Otsego. I'm seeing a lot of people of color moving to those neighborhoods and moving into the developments that we're building and leaving Minneapolis. And we need to provide them some sort of an incentive to stay. So I look at things like, I proposed suspending property tax payments for 5 years. Other things like that as a way to kind of keep them here, kind of incentivize them to stay here and, you know, start to build that generational wealth, because that is important. It's not something that doesn't just affect the current generation or the current people buying the house, but it affects their children and even their grandchildren, you know, because if they stay in that home long enough, it creates the kind of wealth that they can hand down to their children when they move on. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Nate. All right. So returning back to the questions that have been posed, and we will turn next to Clint to answer this question first. There have been many questions posed that relate to understanding and support for those who are homeless or unhoused in our community. So I'm going to pose this question directly from the Q&A. What current programs do you support that address our homeless youth? And what, if anything, would you change about what is in place today? Clint, 2 minutes.
So, of course, as you mentioned, homelessness is a very, very serious issue here in Minneapolis, and you see it anytime you drive around the city. And it's to your point, it starts young for many people, and I've seen that firsthand. So how do we deal with this? You know, we do have a stable homes program that deals stable schools that does help children who are in a precarious situation. They don't have stability in their homes, and that is helping some children at school age to have stability that they need to get into school and learn. Because if you have unstable living situation, as you know, that affects your ability to learn, and that is paramount, our children's ability to learn in the city. And so we have to expand that kind of program, because unfortunately right now, it is only really scratching the surface. So we can expand that program because it has been successful for the people who has touched. We also need to think very seriously about, you know, the parents here and supporting the parents of these children. And that's how we create more stability in their lives. We need to create jobs. We need to bring jobs to Minneapolis. We need to boost up the small businesses located around the city that have in historically, unfortunate areas like North Minneapolis. We need to boost the small businesses there and allow for ownership in the Black community. We were up on open streets in North Minneapolis on Broadway, and all of the businesses there are boarded up. A lot of them. I mean, not all of them, but quite a few. And these people who own the buildings are sitting on them. We need to jack up our taxes for a vacancy tax to get those businesses open. And we need to support Black-owned businesses there so that we can get the streets open and people can enjoy themselves, and they can hire other people from the community, create jobs. I also want to bring jobs into the city.
Thank you, Clint. Your time was up. Mark, you have, just hang on a second here. Let me reset my clock. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening, and thank you for this question. Homelessness is a significant issue across our nation and in Minneapolis. And what can we do to really address it and try and create an environment where young kids and people aren't going homeless? And it's a trickle-down effect here. These people get caught in the system. These people are homeless, they don't have jobs. So number one program that I like that I've seen is the city has created small apartments in office showroom buildings. They're big buildings, somewhat warehouse buildings. And what they've done is they've created separate apartment units inexpensively for each resident so that they can have privacy and pursue jobs and do all those things that they need to have to feel positive about life and positive about themselves so that they can move themselves to a better position. I think number two is teaching kids and coaching kids and really going down into these areas and talking to people about what is the best route to get out of homelessness, what are the best career routes, what are the best ways to get funding? What's the best way to provide support for these kids and people who are homeless? I think we need more of a robust coaching, teaching group that's going in and working with these people on a daily basis, because it is a very, very tough situation to break out from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. 1 second here. And Kate, you have 2 minutes.
When we're talking about our homelessness and our unhoused neighbors, it is really important to center the needs of people and the fact that we are talking about people and neighbors when we're talking about homelessness. And that is the approach I will take as mayor, centering the needs of people and particularly young people. So we need to ramp up programming to address unhoused neighbors. We need to have funding that specifically helps stabilize families. I would like to see universal basic income pilots starting and then expanding. I think we need to continue and expand stable homes and stable schools programming to particularly focus on families with children and young people. You know, I also see housing and particularly stable housing for families and young people as an essential part of safety. And part of that approach is really ramping up funding in young people and programmings with our parks for making sure families have the ability to not just have a safe and stable place to live, but have a whole community that is helping to support them in raising the young people in our city. And finally, we need to make sure that we are working to reduce encounters between police and unhoused people in our community, particularly young people, because being unhoused is already a traumatic experience, and we need to make sure we are doing everything as a city to not add to those traumas that unhoused neighbors, particularly young people in our city, are experiencing.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, Sheila.
Thank you so much for that question. The audience member who asked it, Stable Homes, Stable Schools is on my platform, expanding it. As I mentioned, what I do right now is I'm a budget analyst with Reclaim the Block. So I look at what we're spending on safety and what we're spending on policing and what we're getting. And if you look at the budget, we spend $2.1 million a year on Stable Homes, Stable Schools. And then if you look at the police budget, we spend $3.1 million on the K-9 unit alone. So what does that tell you about our city's current priorities? So as mayor, I would shift more funding into expanding Stable Homes, Stable Schools. I also believe in crafting policies by starting with the people who are most impacted by it. That's why I held a policy session called Policy for Youth, where young people came and told me what they would like to see change in the city. They talked about the affordable housing they would like to see. And a lot of the youth who showed up were young, queer, and trans youth. And there is really a need for more supportive housing for queer and trans youth who might not be able to stay with their families. And that's why I'm a big supporter of the LGBTQ host homes program and would love to see an expansion of that, in addition to having a LGBTQ community center in Minneapolis, because we are sorely missing that space. And I would welcome hearing from parents and students who are watching or watching this afterwards. Please send me an email. I'd love to hear about what you would like to see change regarding housing and stable homes for young people in the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jerrell, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Stable Home, Stable Schools is an awesome program which community advocated for. And I gave Mayor Fry full credit, and I applauded him when he signed off to roll it out, which at that time, city data said that we had over 6,000 homeless students in our city. The thing that I would change is the fact that families have to be enrolled in one of 18 Minneapolis public schools. And community has told me that they want that program to include all 100 schools. And any child in our city whose taxes help fund this program, whether they are in public school, private school, charter school, or even homeschooled. And we will take away the loophole that allows children to lose this opportunity because of a parent's criminal record, which is of no fault of a child, and having housing should not be dependent on that at all. Every child deserves a place to call home. And studies show that when children have that stable housing, they have a much higher rate of success in school. I've been studying in solidarity with and fully supporting National Parents Union, Housing Justice, and Child Justice to partner with Minneapolis Public School Superintendent Graff to also step up and contribute to the pot to ensure that child justice and housing justice is fully supporting and fully funding stable homes, stable schools. In our last discussion, Mayor Fry said that he wanted to partner with me on this, and he doesn't have to wait on a partnership. Like me, he does not have to wait until the election results come in to do something about this. If he's willing to do this and it's in his heart, he can do this tomorrow by going in and signing off on it and then advocating that the other people step up and help do the same thing. We can do this together, and if elected, I will act immediately to expand that program. Again, Mayor Fry can do this tomorrow and benefit every child in the city of Minneapolis and make sure they have a warm, stable place to call home.
Thank you, Jerrell. And next, Troy.
So I want to start by saying that housing is a human right. And I'm aware of programs that try to do sort of things around the edges, but really what I want to focus on is what am I going to change? And I go back to that point. Housing is a human right. Homelessness is complicated unless it's because you have no income or you just got kicked out due to a breakup. Those two are pretty simple. So what do we do about the income part? Well, we have a basic income. We need to have a basic income program backed by municipal bonds and a Minneapolis digital electronic currency with local control of the monetary policy of the currency we use to fund our homeless programs. If we don't start there, we're still using someone else's money, and we're still using the policy embedded in the money that we're using. So we're using whatever Washington, D.C. decides for our homeless program. We're not having a debate about what our real homeless programs are going to be unless we have control over the money and how it is created, how it is distributed, and how it is redistributed. Because we really can't do that unless we have control of the money supply. And, you know, and if we can do all of those things, we can start having a real conversation about what is possible. Because right now, we have a lot of political talk, and we can't really actually do a lot of things that we are talking about. can only work around the edges and talk about how we're doing, talk about how bad homelessness problem in Minneapolis is, but then it's hard to do anything without control of our money. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Next, we have Nate.
Yeah, so I think this is I think whenever we start talking about homelessness, we get into like very, very difficult conversations because there's a lot of different things that kind of come into this that are intertangled here. We have issues with like mental health issues. We have drug issues. I think one of the most significant things that we could do is to decriminalize drug use and possession in the city. Unfortunately, right now, we are kind of pursuing and kind of falling in line with the current kind of state and federal laws in terms of drug use and possession. And we are, we're penalizing people for things that are more or less victimless crimes. And it's resulting in people not being able to have access to housing. They're being denied, rental applications, housing applications, things like that because of a criminal record that, quite frankly, they shouldn't have because they were, more or less busted for possessing a plant. If we had a system of kind of drug decriminalization where we weren't throwing people in cages and prisons for their decisions and instead kind of redirecting them towards rehabilitation and things like that, we wouldn't have these sorts of issues. I've proposed that we need to identify a city-run centralized place where people can go to get mental health assistance and help for their issues so that that can help them kind of rise out of homelessness, so that can prevent those sorts of things. Those are the sorts of things that we could do to be a little more proactive instead of kind of be reactive to a lot of these issues.
Thank you, Nate. Your time was just up. And we have AJ.
Yeah, thank you for that question. If I remember correctly, relating to youth homeless in particular, I think as many candidates have really demonstrated and articulated, this is a very multifaceted, issue. It's not just as simple as an isolated focus on youth. And I think many layers intersect. And I think affordable housing is one of them. To answer the question directly with regards to some of the policies in the city, I mean, I think as many of the candidates have said, stable homes, stable schools, focusing really on rental assistance and trying to make sure people stay and are not insecure about making rental payments is a great pilot project and program. It's something that definitely would be expanded, as many other candidates said, under my administration. But for me, all of these things are also very much focusing, and the big problem with them that they're focusing on is this funding source. As many people know, stable homes and stable schools are funded by many partners, though the city has the significant lion's share in those investments. And if that's the issue of really how do we get more of our youth housed, how do we get people out of the streets, and how do we make sure to embrace this fundamental concept of housing as a human right, we have to increase the pie. And I think I'm the only candidate that has been continuously advocating with regards to making sure Minneapolis is honestly getting the flexibility and the authority from the state, and that means taxing luxury apartments and townhomes that qualify, and being able to have more revenue, and we can start focusing on both aspects of developing more properties. And I think many candidates are in agreement with me that having that focus be on public housing. And if we do that along with those other, I think, very much intersectional issues of education and youth empowerment, making sure our youth honestly have an alternative. I think the last speaker spoke very eloquently on, this drug culture and making sure that we
All right, thank you very much. We have gone through, just double checking, all of our candidates to respond to that question. And we are on to our next, and we will start with Mark. So the next question from the Q&A that I'm selecting is about the money. Please talk about financing for more affordable housing and deeply affordable housing. Where will you find the money, assuming HUD will not be increasing their budget? And I will add to this question, if you could also tell us, where does affordable housing today fit within your priority lists of, you know, these difficult decisions that you would have to make? Mark?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a very important question. Affordable housing in Minneapolis is key to making our city successful and vibrant so that everybody can stay in our city. I think I'm a little bit different from a number of the other candidates in that I think the best solutions are market solutions, where we can put together a mechanism for the city to be incentivized to create more affordable housing and the development community. A lot of people have a negative take on developers. However, they are the people who are actually building and developing the housing. They're the people who are able to get the funding to actually fund these projects. So one of the most important things is to make that project work for both the developer and the city. And I've noticed, I've talked to developers and I've talked to the city, and I think too often the city planning staff and developers are not on the same sheet. They're not marching to the same beat. What we need to do is we need to get together and create as much affordable housing and work together as a team. Instead of fighting each other, work together as a team. Instead of having 150 hoops to get through, let's get support from the city and support from the developers. And we can reach out to different funding sources, the regular banking community, to fund these projects. It's doable as long as it makes sense for both the city and the developers in a market way, so both can be incentivized and actually make a project that earns money for both sides. And I think that's key in this.
Thank you, Mark. You just, your time ended. Next is Kate.
I appreciate the question and identifying specifically that HUD may not be stepping up in the ways we need. So I have put forward a comprehensive housing plan, and a focus on affordable and particularly deeply affordable housing is a central part of it. And part of my commitment to deeply affordable housing is supporting and championing a public housing levy. I know this is something that the city has hesitated to use, given that we see public housing as something the federal government should fund. But given the level of housing crisis we're experiencing and the importance and the value of Minneapolis being a place where people with all different kinds of backgrounds and incomes can come and find a place to call home, I do think it's time to use that public housing levy. And we can move it forward a bit through some finance techniques with bonding to both rehab public housing we already have and build more, and build it not just in big like tower units, but in rehabbing or updating single family homes into multi-units like duplexes or triplexes. So public housing is in neighborhoods across the city. I think that is important for us to be a city that's connected across different levels of income, different socioeconomic classes, that public housing is something that we can have in different parts of the city. So I have significant concern moving forward about our city budget. I know they just passed the maximum tax levy today. I'm concerned about how increasing skyrocketing costs of policing, particularly police brutality payouts and PTSD and workers' compensation payouts happening. There's a lot of things we have to balance in our city budget, and that's why having that public housing levy is really an important part of ensuring deeply affordable housing in the city.
Thank you very much. Sheila.
Thank you for that question. Y'all, talking about budgets is my very favorite thing to do. I held a session last week called From the Streets to the Spreadsheets, breaking down the city budget. So I definitely do support bonding for more public housing. I also think that we should have a youth levy. We have underinvested in our youth for too long, and I think those go hand in hand with the previous question that we were talking about. And we also need to be spending more general fund dollars on affordable housing. This current budget proposal, Mayor Fry is proposing $22 million of general fund dollars into affordable housing, 22 million and 190 million into the only department that is under state and federal human rights investigations. So there are candidates who I mean, it's unfortunate that Mayor Fry cannot be with us here today, but really look at when they're talking about what they're going to fund in the future. I'm talking in circles. Anyway, we need to fund more affordable housing. We need to move money out of the militarization of our police, move money out of the evictions of our encampments. We're about to have the biggest eviction of folks living outside in the next few days that has happened in probably a decade. And we're spending tens of thousands of dollars on that we could have been spending on at least hotel rooms, if not long-term solutions. So it's about priorities. And it's also about having a leader who can work effectively with state and federal and county governments to be able to bring in more funds in Minneapolis that will help everyone stay housed and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate to answer is Jerrell.
All right, thank you for the question. So affordable housing is currently based on 60% of area median income. Mayor Fry's own website, the city data says that out of the renters in our city, approximately 50,000 renters earn less than 60%. So how does that make sense to us that we're touting affordable housing based on that income that starts as high as $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 a month? It's not affordable to the Minneapolitans that need it the most. We have to have an affordable housing infrastructure that is not based off the area median income, but that instead is based off our individual income. What's affordable to me may not be affordable to you. What's affordable to you may not be affordable to me. So together we will create an individualized program that is capped at 30% of a person's income. And that way we can ensure that every Minneapolitan, every one of our children will have a warm and safe place to call home. One of the biggest things people ask is, where's the money going to come from? We keep talking about the 135 million we got last year, the 135 that's coming in May. There was a $70 million proposal years ago. And now Ms. Nezhad was talking about $22 million. That money is going to private developers when that money should be going into city-owned property so that it's recirculating back to the city and that Minneapolitan residents are benefiting off of that money. We have a phenomenal woman named Samantha Sprigg-Stinson that's running for the Board of Estimate and Taxation. She's looked at all of this. She's analyzed the budget. She has solutions to where this money would come from. So all we have to do is bring the people together that know these types of things. And I believe that we can make it all work. We have to be willing to sit down and listen to one another. And my grandpa always says, teamwork makes the dream work. And we have to be willing to hear those ideas from other people, especially the experts that know this.
Thank you very much. Next, Troy.
Thank you. So I want to start this. In some ways, I feel like this is a repeat of what I just answered in the last question. But how do we finance more affordable housing? Well, I think we have to create new money and give it to people. And this is, it sounds simple, but it is both simple and complicated at the same time. But it requires creating a new class of currency. that is not in control of a two-party broken political system in Washington, D.C. It requires that we issue a new digital electronic currency for Minneapolis, controlled in Minneapolis, for our benefit in Minneapolis. So we give people money so they can afford to buy a house. They can afford to pay rent. We need to provide education on what do you do with this new wealth that all of a sudden now you have this income because you're a Minneapolis resident. And another thing, we've heard about bonds. We have to be able to issue bonds. And we also have to look at what the market, the bond market, is going to do based on our program. So we have to take input from, what the rest of the world looks at about monetary policy. And one of the things to keep in mind here, when I talk about creating new money, 10 years ago, I downloaded this new digital electronic currency. And it's worth over $1 trillion. These new digital electronic currencies are worth over $1 trillion 10 years later. So let's just think about, where does the money come from? What happens if we create our own money that provides housing as a human right? What does that do for our economy? How can we be an example to the rest of the world on what do we do with new money? Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Next, we have Nate.
So I want to kind of springboard off a couple things that both Sheila and Troy have mentioned that I think are kind of important. I share in Troy's concern about our currency. I do think a lot of issues, if not all of our issues related to affordable housing, go directly to our Federal Reserve banking system. That's kind of at the root cause of all the problems related to affordable housing. I don't know if I completely buy into and support his idea of like a digital currency in the city of Minneapolis. I kind of want to hear that more kind of fleshed out, but I do like his line of thinking. I like that kind of thinking outside the box. I do think that, yeah, we need to figure out a way, because really at the core of this, it's all tied to the dollar. And I know that's not a popular thing to say. I know a lot of people listening, a lot of people on this forum are probably kind of rolling their eyes and probably saying, yeah, whatever, this is just crankish kind of stuff, related to like currency and monetary policy, but it is very important. It does play a very significant role in our lives, especially when it comes to the housing sector. I think Sheila touched on something that I think was really important, when we're talking about where we're allocating funds within the city. The militarization of police is something that it's a really big effing problem. And I hope I can say effing on this. But it's like we're militarizing our police, and we're at the same time, we're telling people, no, you can't have an affordable home, or you can't have a quality education, because we need to give tanks and crazy, I don't know, what next? They're going to get like F-15s to the police, stuff like that. It's kind of like a lot of these issues are kind of tied to other things that we're doing within the city. And I think we need to reprioritize our budget priorities and rethink of some of these things.
Thank you very much, Nate. You just you used all of your time. And our next candidate to respond is AJ.
Yeah, could you repeat the question for me? Is that possible?
Yes, just a moment. Please talk about financing for more affordable housing and deeply affordable housing. Where will you find the money, assuming HUD will not be increasing its budget? And I added, how would you prioritize this amongst the other challenges you would be addressing through your budget? Housing.
Yes, so very important question. This is amazing. I love this question for the simple fact that this is what I've been really signaling to the people of Minneapolis. And as far as our leadership is concerned, we need to start addressing sustainable funding, which means actually asking the people of Minneapolis to really chip in and make sure that we have the budget required. And that means taxing. I mean, we really have a tax deficit now, everything that has transpired over the year since the uprising, and thinking creatively really means really asking people for more. And that's what I've been doing on this campaign consistently. I know that we don't have the authority, and this is another thing that I'm signaling and trying to warn and plead with the city of Minneapolis, that we need a mayor to champion this at the state level to get the authority to start taxing renters, and specifically luxury apartment complex renters that can afford it. The city is growing in the rate of that, and the trend, there's more renters in the city, and the development trends look like these luxury apartments. And I think these individuals are willing to contribute. I say this time and time again, I'm one of those individuals, and that really is going to be the answer for me, to really bring the conversation to something that's sustainable. And that is the only way to sustain actual affordable housing, but truly, as many candidates emphasize, public housing developments. In line with some of the suggestions from other candidates, levies, making sure that, we have the leverage to incentivize developers to get into public-private partnerships. All those things are tools that I think should be in the toolbox. But for me, at least, as AJ Awed, my administration will definitely be championing the taxing authority that I think will get us to a sustainable budget in terms of these investments in housing, and looks to the future, and not, to old policies or archaic policies and structures that are really outdated in the current market.
Thank you. Clint, you have the last response.
Well, thank you. And this is a great question. So I think the one part of your question was, where does affordable housing rank on my priority list? And that's number 2. So public safety is number 1, and affordable housing is number 2, and small business boom is number 3. So there was some suggestion that we should maybe cut police budget. I totally agree that the militarization of the police needs to stop immediately, and we need to move forward there, but we cannot cut from our police department. We are down over 200 police officers, and the latest stat is 48 children have been shot in the city so far this year. That cannot happen. Where does the financing come from? That's an excellent question. So we have, again, well over $100 million of emergency relief funding that's sitting out there. I want to use some of that for affordable housing. We have Hennepin and state level governments that we can tap into, and we can present a very strong case for why they should be helping more than they are. Public-private partnerships, they're successful all over the country. We got to have more of them. We have some of the most successful businesses in the country surrounding the metropolitan area. And frankly, we need to convene them all in a very serious series of meetings to have them pony up and step up for the city that our state depends on. And I think we can make a very convincing case to them where they are joining together to provide a really nice fund that will help long-term for affordable housing. And no one ever talks about cutting expenses here. In our city, we do pay a very high tax rate. So I know taxes was mentioned as though this is just the go-to without thinking creatively. Well, we're asking quite a bit from our tax base as it is. People could go to Texas and pay 0 income tax, and that's where a lot of companies are going. So we have to start looking at cutting our expenses. We have a lot of bloat in our government here, and no one sat down to think about where we have redundancies and where we have people who are not actually adding benefit to our city government. We need to start thinking about cutting that. So there are other ways to do this. I don't believe in public housing so much. I believe in supplemental voucher system for our Section 8, which provides a lot more flexibility.
Thank you so much, Clint. Your time is up. I have a quick question, and I need a thumbs up. And if I don't get thumbs up from all candidates, we will just say thank you to all. We only have time for a speed round of 1-minute answers. Are you willing to do that? We don't really have a great speed question, I gotta say, but willing to try? AJ, yes?
Yep.
Okay. Here is the question that I am pulling from the Q&A. Do you think criminal history should be able to be used regarding awarding housing or providing housing in Minneapolis? And the first person to answer that would be Kate.
Well, thank you for the question. I think we need to be making sure when we talk about housing that we are truly making pathways into safe, stable housing for everyone. And that does include people with criminal histories. And we need to be making sure that landlords are comfortable with that, that we are comfortable with neighbors with that, but we absolutely need to make sure that a criminal history, especially if it's at a young age or nonviolent, is not a barrier to housing. When we talk about Minneapolis being a place that different people can live, we need to live that value, and we need to make sure we are not perpetuating the racial injustice of over policing and under protecting and incarceration in our housing. And so I think it's an important issue to address in our overall housing policy. And I want to just put in the chat for our folks.
Thank you. Sheila, you are next with 1 minute.
Housing is a human right. That means everyone has a right to housing. I do not believe that criminal history should be a barrier to housing. I believe that our criminal justice system has a long history of evidence that it is racially biased. And we also know that the safest communities are the ones with the most resources. The safest communities are the ones where more people have homes, where there's more libraries, where there are more good schools for children. This is how we build safety. And I'm running for mayor because I believe that we need bigger solutions for safety. And that includes changing the way we allow folks to access housing, the kinds of housing we build, and rent control, which I am a strong supporter of. So I absolutely believe we need to change the requirements for housing. We also need stronger tenant protections, because while the rules might be in place to protect tenants, oftentimes landlords act.
1 minute is tough, everyone. It really is. So I apologize to the candidates. They were very gracious in saying yes. Jerrell, 1 minute.
I absolutely do not think criminal history should have an impact on attaining rental housing. I think that's one more to many layers of ways that landlords are able to legally discriminate. The only thing that should be considered for rental property is your rental history, whether or not you can pay the rent. It shouldn't be your background check. It shouldn't be something that you did a while ago. It shouldn't be your credit check or anything else like that. The most consistent bill that people, especially Minneapolis, pay is their rent. So that's the only thing that we should be looking at. And again, their income to make sure that they can pay that monthly rent. Everybody, again, housing is a human right. Everybody should be having access to housing in the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you. Troy, 1 minute.
Thank you. This is hard because I think I'm going to say it, we're going to run into the quiet racism that we have in Minneapolis here, because criminal history is going to be used as a scare tactic. I can already tell what the headlines are going to be for this question. Again, housing is a human right. We have to find a way to provide housing for everyone. I don't really know how to do that in this case. I know we need more things like restorative justice. Instead of talking about, oh, this is a criminal, no, we need to restore. You know, if you've done something and you've got convicted for something, you can be restored to full citizenship, where you can get housing, where you can get a credit card, you can get good credit, you can get income. We need to be able to provide that. Thank you.
Thank you. Nate, 1 minute.
All right, I'm going to try to cram a lot of stuff here into 1 minute. Okay, when it comes to the question of denying people with a criminal record, absolutely, we should not be denying people with a criminal record in relation to victimless crimes. When it comes to victim crimes, particularly domestic issues, there are some concerns that I have about providing people being able to deny housing or rental opportunities to people with domestic issues. That's just something that's kind of on the top of my head. I do want to use my time to close some things out. I've heard a lot of good issues here. Sheila talked about the demilitarization of police. I think that's important. We need to keep that on our minds. Troy talked about kind of decoupling ourselves from the monetary system that is from our federal government. I think that's another thing that we need to keep talking about. And I think Jerrell Perry talked about things like redlining. Minneapolis.
Thank you, Nate. Whoops. Next we have AJ.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I do not believe it's ethical for someone to be prevented housing because of criminal record. That being said, I think there are certain, specific circumstances where criminal record could be considered. And I'm not even thinking about domestic, actually. I'm thinking more about child molestation and, other sex offenders. But outside of those realms, I think there should really be no use of criminal records. I think someone that has served their time in prison or has served their sentence should not be having that clout them throughout their life as they try to rehabilitate themselves and actually achieve personal development. So thank you.
Thank you. Clint, 1 minute.
Yeah, this is a really complicated question. I mean, if we're talking about private landlords, and let's say whether a private landlord has to rent to someone who is a child molester in a building with children, I think that is the case where that landlord should be able to deny that person a unit in their rental home or rental unit. But of course, I think across the board, I totally agree that housing is a human right, and we need to provide housing to some extent to everyone, no matter what they've been charged with, convicted of, no matter what they've done in their life. They need a roof over their head, and that should be a livable roof, a home that does not get them sick. And that's one thing our leadership does not talk about, is livability in homes. We have a lot of people who are living in homes that are getting themselves and their children sick, and I plan on boosting our inspection program immediately to be much more proactive on that front. But we need to be sophisticated about this issue, and it's not just a straightforward yes or no answer.
Thank you, Clint. Mark?
Thanks for this question. Again, it's complicated, but I think an owner needs to take a holistic approach to renting to somebody. They need to look at all the circumstances. I think anything like a misdemeanor should not be taken into consideration. Felonies are a little bit different. There should probably be a couple of years there. But again, the landlord needs to take a holistic approach to things. The city needs to step in and help these renters who need help renting. That's an area where the city can create more housing and backstop it. In closing, I just want to say, we're going to the polls in 5 weeks. If you're comfortable with where the city is right now, then you should vote for the current mayor. But if you're concerned where the city is, look at me as a good option to replace the mayor. I appreciate your vote on November.
Thank you all so much. Again, 1 minute is tough. I want to say a big thank you to these candidates. Thank you for your generosity and joining us for this forum and participating fully. It's very important for voters to hear directly from you. And to our attendees, thank you very much for joining us this evening. If you have other questions, you should reach out directly to candidates to hear from them. And Make Homes Happen will be sharing this forum in its entirety on our Facebook page. So again, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.